Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this short video I'm going to try and ask a question, or more actually reflect a question back at the people who ask it. Are you too cheap in your print products? Now, I'm a commercial photographer, architectural photographer. I do occasional prints for sale. It's not a significant part of our business. It is part of the business. And I've done lots of other videos about the business side of printing, but they tend to be for, shall we say, fine art prints. Now, I don't actually know what that term means, but it typically for landscape stuff would be things like this waterfall, this view of the coast, black and white. More, well, fine art, I suppose that's what it gets called. These things, if you sell these, then I've looked at kind of media to use, kind of printer to use, and depending on your market you're looking for a moderately good price up to a very good price depending on the materials you use and things like that. But what about cheaper stuff? Well, I'm not going to pick a board like this. This is an Epson poster board which I printed using the Epson XP-150, mainly because this board's quite expensive. It's not cheap. And it's not a media I'd necessarily choose for putting my work on. It's useful to know I can produce it, but it's not a cheap solution. The question I get asked is typically by people who want to make prints, small prints, postcards, greetings cards of their images, and they want to sell printed stuff. Printed stuff is probably the broadest term I can use for it. Now, I did a video recently about scanning. This is a card printed on what is, I suppose, would be a fine art media. It's a very nice paper. It's a cotton rag paper. And this is a scan of a watercolour a friend of mine created, and she wanted to know if I could make some cards. And I took the image, which is quite a bit bigger, scanned it down, processed it, and there's a video about making this card that goes into all the colour management and stuff. Now, that's fair enough. That's a nice bit of card. Those cards will cost you some. I don't keep track of prices throughout the world because I know these videos are viewed in lots of different places, so the prices that I pay here in the UK may be different to what you're likely to pay. But it's not a cheap media. Now, I've also looked at other videos at some of the problems of picking the right media for images and using test images. Now, test images, ones like this, which I shall move a bit closer just so you can see it, to make sure that the media actually works. These are 6x4 cards, these are glossy. These ones were, I believe, printed on a Canon Pro 200, which is a dye-based ink printer. You need, ideally, if you get a new media, to test it with a test image to see if it's any good. And there comes the real problem, because, and I'll switch to an image more likely to end its way on a card or something like that. The tendency of people, and I get asked this question, is it always starts with how much is, or can I use such and such card stock? Now, I've looked into some of these card stocks and things like this, and you find that whereas a high quality medium like this may cost anything up to, I don't know, 70p to £1 per sheet with envelope, the cheaper medium will cost you pence. Well, guess what? You pay pence for your media, you get results that show it. This is a hard thing to say to people because I know they're trying to set up a business or trying to make some money selling prints, but if you buy cheap media, almost always your results will be cheap as well and they won't be worth selling, or you won't get many people actually want to buy them. And it is a real problem in that if you want to produce quality work that people like, you need more expensive media. You also, unfortunately, tend to need a more expensive printer. Cheap printers and especially cheap inks. If you're going to go for a cheap printer and you don't want to pay much for ink, then your business is cheap. You will produce products that fit with that. There's a possibility you might find some niche that you can fit and you can, I'm going to say, get away with it, but don't expect to. If you want quality, you have to pay for quality. So that's cheap inks, no. Cheap printers, unlikely. Not if you want a really good range of colour. You need a better quality printer. And this comes back to, if I'm selling a print, I made several copies of this, partly to show it could be done, and partly for a friend of mine who will probably send them to people at Christmas. She's not looking to sell them, she just wants a few cards. Now, making a few cards, printing a couple of dozen cards, slightly tedious, loading up the paper, running it through. Didn't matter, it didn't take too long. I don't mind doing that. As long as I don't get sent this card for Christmas, I won't mind. Now, what happens if I actually want to make a business? Let's say I've decided that I can sell 50 cards a day and I want to print 50 cards a day. 50 cards on a normal desktop printer is going to take you a fair while to print. You can't just load up a stack of paper like this. You can put a few sheets in, probably, in some of the printers I've tested, but you can't just load this up and expect to go away, do something else, come back, there's all your prints done. You've got to tend it, you've got to look after it. So that's time. And one of the things I find that a lot of people looking at the sort of craft side of things and photography, because obviously my background's photography, so it's unusual for me doing a watercolour print here, but I'm looking at printing photography, so I have an expectation of a market, and I also know how much I can sell things for. I get the impression that a lot of people who ask me about prices and about using cheaper media perhaps haven't worked out the real costs. That includes, as I say, your time loading up stuff. 50 a day. A printer, ordinary desktop printer, will work for a fair while, running off 50 prints a day. You should be able to manage it, any modern printer. But it's not really made for production level. If you want to produce, I wanted to produce lots of prints of this. Say for some reason this picture became incredibly popular and I had loads of people wanting to buy it. Well, I wouldn't print it myself. I'd find a printer who specialises in producing cards. I'd send them the artwork to print. They would send it, they would print these off. And as long as I wanted hundreds of them, preferably thousands, I could get these at a really good price. Even with a fairly good media like this, price comes down once you start doing quality and once you start doing quantity, and you don't have to sacrifice quality for it. So it's a matter of thinking about what's my business model for selling these things. And this is the bit, and I get asked a lot of questions, particularly since I started doing the videos. And it comes from people I can see sincerely want to actually think their stuff is good enough to sell. People want to buy it. And the oldest question is, when you're looking at your market, it should never be, where do I sell these? It should always be, who wants to buy my stuff? Because if you know who, you know where they're likely to be. So always start with who. But I'm afraid that if you're producing low volumes, then almost always you will need to spend money on reasonable quality media, a reasonable quality printer, and take the time to do it. If it's a business, you also need to take time looking at how much time you're putting into it for the return. I come across a lot of craft businesses which are hobbies. Fair enough, they're hobbies. Don't try and tell me it's a serious business if you don't know your costs. Anyway, I hope that's not too much of a downer for people wanting to do prints on cards and things like this, because it can be very worthwhile. But just appreciate, if your first concerns are how cheap can I do this, that's maybe not the first thing you should look at. Now, I've got lots of other videos like this about aspects of printing, printer reviews, photography as well. So please do subscribe if you find the channel of help. Ask questions, drop me an email. I'm hoping that our website will be fixed before too long. It's very sluggish at the moment, so I've got lots of articles as well that cover stuff like this. But hope that's been of use for you. Thank you very much.